Background. The Cold War era was characterized by intense rivalry and ideological conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union. By the early 1960s, this rivalry had resulted in an arms race, with both superpowers rapidly developing and stockpiling nuclear weapons. The situation was further complicated by geopolitical shifts and regional conflicts. In 1959, Fidel Castro led a successful revolution in Cuba, overthrowing the US-backed dictator Fulgencio Batista. Castro's new government sought to reduce Cuba's economic and political dependence on the United States and increasingly aligned itself with the Soviet Union. This alignment was partly a strategic move to seek protection against potential US interventions, which had been a threat since the revolution. In April 1961, the United States sponsored an invasion of Cuba by Cuban exiles, known as the Bay of Pigs invasion. The invasion, intended to overthrow Castro, failed disastrously. This failure embarrassed the United States and pushed Cuba even closer to the Soviet Union, which began to view the island nation as a critical ally in the Western Hemisphere. Discovery of missiles. On October 14, 1962, a US U-2 spy plane conducted a high-altitude reconnaissance flight over Cuba. The photographs taken during this mission revealed that the Soviet Union was constructing missile bases on the island, capable of launching nuclear missiles at the United States. The discovery was alarming because these missiles significantly reduced the warning time for a nuclear strike against the US, thereby altering the strategic balance. President John F. Kennedy was informed of the missile sites on October 16, 1962. This revelation led to a series of high-level meetings and the establishment of the Executive Committee of the National Security Council, EXCOM, a group of Kennedy's closest advisors, tasked with handling the unfolding crisis. The confrontation. On October 22, 1962, President Kennedy addressed the nation in a televised speech, revealing the existence of Soviet missiles in Cuba. He announced a naval blockade, termed a quarantine, around Cuba, to prevent further Soviet missiles from reaching the island. This quarantine was intended to be a non-aggressive measure, but it was effectively a blockade, an act that could be seen as an act of war. The U.S. Navy established the blockade, creating a zone around Cuba where all incoming ships would be stopped and inspected. The world watched anxiously as Soviet ships, some carrying additional military supplies, approached the blockade line. The potential for direct military confrontation between the U.S. and Soviet navies was high. Intense diplomatic negotiations and back-channel communications between the U.S. and the Soviet Union ensued. Both superpowers were acutely aware of the catastrophic potential of a nuclear conflict. The stakes were incredibly high, and miscommunication or miscalculation could have dire consequences. Resolution. On October 26, 1962, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev sent a letter to President Kennedy proposing a resolution. The Soviet Union would remove its missiles from Cuba if the United States publicly declared it would never invade Cuba. This proposal was seen as a way to de-escalate the situation while allowing the Soviet Union to claim a diplomatic victory. The following day, on October 27, Khrushchev sent a second letter with a new condition: the United States should also remove its Jupiter missiles from Turkey. These missiles, located near the Soviet Union's border, were a significant strategic threat. This second letter complicated the negotiations, but it also opened a path to a broader resolution. Kennedy and his advisors decided to publicly accept the terms of Khrushchev's first letter and secretly agreed to the removal of the Jupiter missiles from Turkey. This secret agreement was crucial in avoiding an escalation and maintaining a balance of power. On October 28, 1962, Khrushchev announced that the Soviet Union would dismantle the missile sites in Cuba and return the missiles to the Soviet Union. The United States, in turn, lifted the blockade on November 20, 1962, after the removal of the missiles was confirmed. Aftermath. The resolution of the Cuban Missile Crisis marked a turning point in U.S.-Soviet relations, leading to a thaw in Cold War tensions. Both nations realized the devastating potential of nuclear war and took steps to improve communication and reduce the risk of future confrontations. This led to the establishment of the Moscow-Washington Hotline in 1963, a direct communication link between the leaders of the two superpowers. In 1963, the United States, Soviet Union, and the United Kingdom signed the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, banning nuclear tests in the atmosphere, outer space, and underwater. This treaty was a significant step towards controlling the nuclear arms race and reducing the environmental damage caused by nuclear testing. The crisis also had significant political ramifications for both leaders. President Kennedy's handling of the crisis was widely praised and boosted his domestic and international standing. In contrast, Khrushchev faced criticism within the Soviet Union for appearing to back down, which contributed to his ouster from power in 1964. The Cuban Missile Crisis remains a stark reminder of the dangers of nuclear brinkmanship and the importance of diplomacy in resolving international conflicts. It showcased the necessity of clear communication, strategic patience, and the willingness to negotiate to prevent catastrophic outcomes.